So, for starters, what do you make of President Trump's decision to federalize the National Guard and also now deploy Marines in a support role on U.S. soil?
It's very disturbing for all Americans. It doesn't matter whether you are from a red county or a blue county. These are two assaults on basic American ideals of number one, freedom of speech, because the vast majority of all those people are just peaceably demonstrating their opinions. And the second one, which is very difficult, is the degree to which the federal government is coming in and smashing states' rights, the ability of a duly elected governor to be able to safeguard, provide safety for its people and its communities. So those two issues about trampling the freedom of speech as well as states' rights should be on everyone's mind.
Is there anything you'd see with the current situation that would warrant the escalation to the president making this order as opposed to, say, the governor calling in the National Guard?
There is absolutely no justification for sending in federalized National Guard people. This is something that has political connotations. The governor of California, number one, has the ability through EMAC agreements, meaning agreements with other governors in other states, to draw on up to 1 million law enforcement people who are trained and badged to augment those forces. Many times in the United States, we move law enforcement around to help with national special security events, and so they're available. The second one is that each governor has their own National Guard to augment and back up the law enforcement people in terms of logistics or communications or for other reasons as needed. So, when I was with the National Guard Bureau, as well as in units in the state of Virginia, for example, as a unit commander, where we did civil disturbance training back in the day, there is absolutely no need to have escalated this so rapidly, let alone sending in Marines who have zero civil disturbance training as it applies to dealing with Americans or for any other nationality for that matter.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the Marines specifically here. What does it do to those men and women to put them in this situation? How is their training sort of a mismatch for this type of civil disobedience, civil disturbance situation?
The first thing is that those Marines are not trained about how do I look at life differently, where my fellow Americans, many of whom look just like them, on the other side of the demonstration line, shall we say. So they're not trained with how do you de-escalate? How do you apply sufficient force, but not too much force? When do you back off? So I think it's going to be very tense for those young Marines. And we have to remember also, in the United States, our Marines are probably our youngest military members. I mean, they are fresh out of camp. The average age is probably 19 or 20 for these young Marines, whereas with National Guardsmen, they typically are older. They're part of the community. The average age could be somewhere early 20s or so. And there's a certain amount of connection to the community and also what I'm going to call maturity of how do you interact with the public. Marines are engage that target, take that hill. And boy, they're going to do a great job. And you need Marines to be able to do that. You do not want them on the streets of LA.
Is there a morale issue here as well? I can imagine this is not what people enlisted in the Marines to do.
I'm not a Marine, so I want to speak as an opinion about the Marines. The Marines are joining to defend their country in whatever capacity that means. I'd like to address perhaps as many as 4,000 guardsmen. Those individuals are being taken out of their civilian jobs. They are being taken out of their communities, and they are being put down into the Los Angeles area to provide support and operations. They're away from their families. They're away from their families not to help their fellow man in the sense of like disaster recovery, earthquakes, fire recovery, like they did with the forest fires that hit LA in the past years. They're not helping people. They are potentially, quite frankly, going to be put in harm's way, either for their personal well-being or potentially for some other people. This is not what they're trained for. Law enforcement officers receive specific training of how do they interact with crowds, and they know the neighborhoods, they know the situation.
So, on top of the situation in LA, this weekend there is this massive military parade taking place here in Washington, D.C. And I'm wondering if you have a sense of the signal that all of this happening at the same time might be sending about how the president views the role of the American military.
His actions and words are all I can say. He has said he's going to put military everywhere. He's going to send soldiers everywhere within the United States. That was said this past Sunday. He is somebody who is regularly beat his chest about how much he admires other countries that have these large military parades. This is all about image. It is all about the idea of making him feel strong. People who are confident leaders do not need to be shown how powerful they are. They just know it. In this particular case, we have the American military that's going to be on display, which since Desert Storm and then World War II, we have not had significant displays of this type of hardware. Even after Desert Storm, it wasn't a parade. It was a static display on the mall in Washington, D.C. So I think this is something that is sad. It is not representative of the military that I was part of, and it is something that I truly believe it does not represent the best of America, which is to come off as being a very powerful nation. Look at all those tanks and all those armed soldiers. That's not who we are. We are quietly powerful, quietly influential, and we don't want to be put on display.
Do you worry at all where this all may be headed?
Absolutely. My concern, of course, is going to be the one thing I'd like to say to compliment the French. The French will, if there is something to protest about, it doesn't matter whether it's winter, spring, summer, or fall, they will all show up and strike or do whatever. In the United States, we are fair weather protesters. We only do things when it's warm outside. So I'm very concerned that as this starts to get into the summertime and into the fall, that depending on the use of force that is demonstrated against peaceful protesters, which, by the way, at some point is going to include moms, dads, veterans, and other just average Americans who are saying, this is not what America is. What will those guardsmen and those Marines and those other people that will be confronted potentially by military on the streets, what is that going to do? So it's setting up a volatile situation. It's not about de-escalation with this administration. It's about escalation. The last thing I'd like to say is, at what point, because the president has already said, and thank goodness we had General Milley and Secretary Esper at the time, plus his own chief of staff, who said, no, we're not going to shoot protesters in the legs, because the president said this. Well, there's no General Milley, there is no Mark Esper in the way of issuing orders. So I think we all need to be very concerned that we must not get there. So in answering your question, am I concerned? I am absolutely concerned. And I think it's important that we all speak up and that we address our elected officials and that we voice that we have got to be able to, we're better than this. We are better than this.
And what about the size of this deployment? There are now more mobilized troops in Los Angeles than there are in Iraq and Syria combined. What does that tell you for these relatively small protests?
It shows that it is an unwarranted exercise of power. It is disproportionate. It is a waste of taxpayer money. It has a negative impact on literally all of those thousands of guardsmen and their families and the businesses that they represent. There is no good in this whatsoever.